Hello, my friends. It's our first Patreon exclusive video Q&A. I only got a few questions, so I think maybe some people didn't see the post, or maybe you didn't all have questions. That's fine. But keep an eye out because we're going to do this every month. I'm in my office with my Reth blanket and my Reth cup. Wait a second. Oh, that's going to reverse, isn't it? And if you think that I'm making this up for you, no, my Reth blanket is always on my chair, and I literally live with that cup in my hands. To be fair, I did that before I had that cup. I always have to have a drink with me, and I prefer to take one with me because I never know. I don't know. I don't even know why, because I only drink water now. But anyway, I do. So that's always with me. And in fact, my sister and her family were teasing me about it when they were here for 2 weeks. And that was the only thing they ever saw me drink out of. Oh, well, I love it. I love it. I love it. Most of the questions that I got this month were Anima questions, which I suppose I shouldn't be surprised about. But I did have one that was just an author question. Cindy asked me, why did you leave New Zealand? How long ago, and would you do it again? So the story is that when I was 5 years, I was born here in the States. When I was 5 years old, my parents went to New Zealand as missionaries. Well, obviously all of us went. It was supposed to be for 3 years, and we never left. So I grew up there. And then when I was 17, we would sort of come back and forth every couple of years just for a visit. So I get to see my family because I have a large extended family here. And so I got to see them every 2 or 3 years for 2 months, 6 weeks, stuff like that. And when I was 17, or just before I turned 17, my sister had finished high school. She's several years older than me, and she had finished high school and was working at a summer camp here in the States. And she said to my parents, why don't you send Amy over for 3 months and to work at the summer camp with me, and then I'll send her back. So my parents arranged a visit. We all came over together, and then I went off to summer camp. While I was working at summer camp, which, by the way, best experience ever if you have kids that want to do that. I was working at Christian summer camps, so there was a lot of control over what kids could and couldn't do and stuff like that. I mean, we still dealt with a lot of stuff, but it was just a really, really good experience for me. So highly recommend. I'm starting to talk to my son about it now that he's getting into his later teens. Anyway, while I was at summer camp, I got a phone call from my parents saying that they had been asked to stay here in the States for at least a year. And how did I feel about doing my last year of high school here in the States? And I was over the moon. I'd made so many friends. I was really happy. I'd really struggled. I had friends growing up all the time, but I struggled socially a lot. I was very severely bullied, and it really left its mark. Even as things sort of settled down a little bit as I got a little older, it was a bad situation, and none of us had the skills at that point to deal with it. So part of the reason they had sent me over, or had planned to send me over here for 3 months, was basically just to get me a break from that. I never had any trouble here. It's really interesting. I wasn't a super popular kid, but I just never had any issues in America with bullying or anything like that. So it's very interesting to me. But anyway, that's not important. You asked me why we left New Zealand. So came back here, ended up staying here to do my last year of high school and a couple years of college while my parents went back. They were only here for like a year and a half. But it was kind of my second year of college, and I just wasn't, I don't know. Things weren't great. I decided to go back to New Zealand and work for a year and ended up never coming back. So that happened when I was 20. I think I went back to New Zealand and we stayed there. And I met my husband when I was 22. We got married when I was 26. And we stayed in New Zealand. My son was born there. And then when my son was still really little. He was, I want to say 5 when we made the decision to come back to America. And the reason primarily that we did that was that I do have a large extended family here. We had visited several times, um, and I have a really great family. And so my husband was like, because he knew that I had wanted to come back. Having children changes things. I'm sure most of you have experienced that. Um, and so not having the opportunity to have my son around family, was hard because my sister was in Australia by that time. So, I found that I really, for the first time in my life, felt like I needed my family. I'd always loved my family and wanted to be around them, but that was the first time having a young child that I felt like I needed my family. So we left when my son was just turned 6 and came back here. And it's been 9-ish years now, 9 or 10 years. So, yeah, we're here. My parents are getting older. They're our neighbors. We built a house 2 years ago they had a large property. We split their property and we built a house on the second half of their property. So we're just a couple acres apart. And yeah, we're basically here until they don't need us anymore. Then we would probably go back to New Zealand. That's the truth. The lifestyle in New Zealand is much better. And it's much more laid back. Just the culture in general. It's much more laid back. I don't love everything about it. Every country, every culture has its issues. There are things that I would change about New Zealand. There are things that I would change about America. But the reality is New Zealand is it's a great place to live if you are educated. That's what it comes down to. If you're educated, you can do pretty much anything. There's this thing that they call Kiwi ingenuity, which means that basically New Zealanders are really good at innovation. Because they're really good at innovation, it's a cultural thing. They don't peg people. So, like, if you look at my CV of my work experience before I came to America and stopped working full time, you would be surprised at sort of the variety of things that I did, and the variety of jobs and organizations that I worked for, the variety of types of jobs that I had. And that's because New Zealanders are much more of the ilk of, if you can do it, we'll give you a shot. Or if we see the potential in you, we're just going to run with it. I know that Americans think they're that way, but the reality is, especially in sort of in education and working, Americans are much more sort of, here's your category, here's your lane. New Zealand is very much, give it a shot, see how it goes. It is a different culture, and I am American enough from being raised by American parents and being here the first few years of my life, that I'm considered loud and obnoxious by New Zealanders. I'm a big talker, as you probably noticed, and just uninhibited in a way that New Zealanders aren't. New Zealanders are much more stoic. They're much more reserved in general. But at the same time, they're far more laid back. So it's a weird mix. But anyway, love New Zealand, honestly. It's a healthier environment. The food is healthier. The lifestyle is healthier. Just the way people live is much more active. But the climate is extremely erratic. It's an island nation, even though it's large islands. So pretty much not everywhere you go, but everywhere I lived was on a coast. So the weather can be really up and down. There's a lot of wind. There can be a lot of rain. But there's also just really beautiful things about that too. Anyway, I would go back. Yes, absolutely. If my parents weren't at the age that they are, we would probably still live there or have gone back there. But I'm glad that we're here. We're both glad that we're here. And with my family and stuff, it's a lot more there's a village here for me, if that makes sense. My husband is also the child of immigrants, so in New Zealand. So, and his father passed away, and his mother is even older than mine. Because my husband's 11 years older than me. And his family's just a lot more spread out and not as sort of deeply connected. They love each other and they're around and they're still a part of our lives, but it's just a different, I don't know. I just have one of those really awesome families. And we wanted our son to have that experience. So that's why we came. And yes, I would absolutely go back. If I was being selfish, that's where I'd live. I've always said, I'll be honest with you, most of my life, even since I was a kid, and people would always say, which one do you like better, or where do you want to live if you had a choice? I've always said, I wish I could take the people I love from America and take them to New Zealand. That's always how I felt. Anyway, enough about me. I have several questions from the Anima world, or stories. There are spoilers here. If you are watching this, I don't think any of you are, but if you're watching this and you haven't read both King of Beasts and Queen of Beasts, Taming the Queen of Beasts, you might want to switch off now, because one or two of these questions, actually all of them, have to do with things that were happening at the end of Queen. So if you haven't read Queen, hit pause and go read it and then come back. So Janelle asked, what was Rika's reaction to how she felt after completing the mate bond with Gar? So I'm not going to tell you the whole story, because I still hope that's some of the sort of extra content that I hope to show you guys. But I would say that whole shift in their relationship, it did two things. One, it made her far more free. So she lost that kind of underlying, I don't want to say lack of trust in Gar, because it wasn't really lack of trust in him, but there was some stuff holding her back. At the same time, just the sort of general sense of, it gave her a stronger feeling of belonging, because there was something now that she experienced that she understood, and it was experience that she shared with many of the Anima. So on like a healthy emotional sense, it was freeing for her. But I'll be honest with you, when I read the question, the first thing I thought of was, oh, she was getting down. Because this opened up. As you know, they were never inhibited with each other anyway. But what this did was really opened up for her the emotional intimacy side, which affected their love life in a really positive way. So yeah, that was honestly the first thing I thought of when I read the question. I was like, bow, bow, bow. I was being silly. But yeah, that was probably the most noticeable effect right off the bat. Cervanthi asked, did Reese adjust well to living in Wildwood? He struggled at the beginning. It wasn't about living in Wildwood. It was about the whole way it went down, losing his parents, and just feeling isolated, different, because he is Anima. So in many ways, he actually belongs better in Wildwood, which is something he would grow into. But right at the beginning, it was a culture that he didn't understand fully, and he felt that gap between himself and the others there. But as soon as he found his mate, and that whole scenario kind of got established, then he didn't want to be anywhere else. And your follow-up question was, how did Laren and Sully take it when they found out he was their daughter's mate? You saw that Laren's initial reaction to that, you saw for both of them, you saw what was their legitimate responses to sort of the early days of that. Laren was far more skeptical and protective and, not necessarily excited. But that had more to do, I think, with Reese's initial, he looked quite weak to the Anima, but he had that quiet strength that came through with time. So as Laren got to know him better, and saw the ways that he was strong, but not sort of, he's not a guy who will draw a lot of attention to himself. And Laren appreciated that. And as they got to know each other and he got to see Reese's spine, so to speak, it went well. And he's a part of their family now. And I love that for him, because Reese needed one thing that I always sort of envisioned in terms of the family structure that Reese, Gary, and Callie had, was that Gary's quite a soft guy. He's not, he's strong, and he's alpha in the sense of he's powerful in his strength of conviction, but he's very soft-hearted. And so in many ways, without meaning to, Gary kind of played into Reese's insecurities. And by that I mean, this was based on something that I experienced with my father. When you have a man who is strong and protective, but also tender and gentle, he expresses a lot of affection, and he expresses a lot of reassurance and comfort. And if you're a kid who needs to be pushed a little bit, who needs a little bit of sort of tough love, or a little bit of getting out of your comfort zone, that kind of parenting, unfortunately, it kind of coddles you a little bit, and you don't grow up as fast, is what it comes down to. And I always kind of imagined that's how it was for Reese. He's strong, and he's intentional, and he's independent. He's not he's not weak, but he really needed a father in his life, or a male in his life, who was going to be like, no, this is how you do it, kind of push him a little bit. And because Laren wasn't entirely sure about him at the beginning, that happened a lot at the beginning, where Laren was sort of testing him and kind of just, this is how you're going to do it, or this is what you're going to deal with, off you go, show us what you can do. And Reese rose to the challenge. And he would have gotten there anyway. He's a good guy, and he's a strong guy. He would have gotten there anyway. But I think having Laren around in the gap of Gary grew him up faster, and in a good way, in a healthy way. Not to say that Gary wasn't a good father. He's an excellent father. But it was just what Reese needed. And Suli was always supportive. She was always of the faith that if the Creator made you to be together, then there was no reason not to be. So she just was really confident that if they had any issues, or if Reese had any issues, they would work through them. So she was never resistant to it. Right from the beginning, it was sort of like, let them explore this and make sure that that's what it is. It was Laren who had some reservations. And then Nix asked, how many kids did Gar and Rika have? And that's a question that's come up several times. And unfortunately, my response this time is going to be the same as the other times. That's a story that I hope to tell, like literally tell. And now with Patreon, I think that's going to give me an opportunity to do it. So you'll have to wait. Oh, I have to go. My son's home. I'll talk to you later.